With critical elections this year in the Netherlands, France and Germany, and also potentially Italy, the end of the year could look very different in the EU from where we are now. To discuss how to trade this, we're now joined by Nicolò Donà from Global Risk Insights. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
First of all, how linked are the potential political developments this year to the markets?
Very much so. I think having this sort of domino effect with the Netherlands elections, then the elections in France, and then upcoming in September and the fall, the elections in Germany and potentially Italy, you're going to see a lot of shifts, I think, in the markets. I think something that the markets are most worried about is a potential contagion effect, a specific upset in one country leading to an upset in another, and basically faltering political predictions that have been made before. So to answer your question, very, very linked.
With your political analyst hat on, how far down the road of populism do you think we'll see the new parties gain traction? Because we've heard a lot about Geert Wilders, we know a lot about Marine Le Pen, and of course also is this resurgent far-right party in Germany as well later on in the year. How much traction do you think these populist parties are going to get?
Well, I think there's two sides to this. On one side, it seems when we look at predictions, and we need to caveat this, we have to be very careful with predictions. We saw where 2016 took us. These parties are going to fare better, but it doesn't seem that they'll be able to control the parliament or control the government. Le Pen doesn't seem to be doing so well in projections in a second round, whether against Macron or Fillon. The same can be said for Wilders, who, despite having a relative majority, at least in the projections, doesn't seem to have a good coalition architecture, even with the PVV or the other members of the right. Despite this, even if the ruling coalitions are going to be formed of other parties, what is pretty much certain is that these parties will play a greater role than they have in previous terms. Even in Germany, the FDP seems to be poised to a better performance despite, SDP, CDU kind of dominance.
Do you see them gaining sufficient amount of voting power to twist the arm of the new political leader, whoever that is, to go for some sort of referendum on the relationship that country has with either the EU or within the Eurozone?
See, that's a good question. I think a referendum would be quite a bit in France if Fillon were elected, just because Fillon would suddenly find himself with a voting base that is also composed of socialists that are not as big fans of the current administration. In the Netherlands, this could be more interesting. The center-right has already announced that they won't ally themselves with Wilders' party. However, they'll have to sort of have this balance. On one side, the right-wing pressure to call a referendum if they were the second largest party, head of a coalition. But at the same time, they would find themselves as part of this coalition that also features members from the left, the Green Party, and so on, that would be vehemently against such referendum. We'll have to see, but the Netherlands, I think, is a particular case to watch closely.
I mentioned the Eurozone. Clearly, the euro is going to be something which is going to be centre ground here for the trading opportunities, I should say. How about the individual countries? Where do you see the trading opportunities potentially coming out of the Dutch elections?
Well, it's very interesting. I think markets are already accounting for a little bit of instability in the Dutch markets. The Netherlands economy is 80% focused on professional services. Any renegotiations with the single market, any consideration of leaving the Eurozone, I think would severely affect negatively professional services firms that are based in the Netherlands but really provide services across the continent. I think markets are already kind of accounting for that because they think that with Wilders in the minority, it could not necessarily cause too much havoc. But I think that's something that we need to be very, very careful for. On the flip side, that could generate some competitive advantage for professional services firms based in other countries, like maybe France itself, Germany, or even the UK if they maintain a good deal of exchange with the common market.
What about France? Because France, we hear still a lot about the fact that it's very broad industry based, and there's a very different potential outcome here. Setting aside Marine Le Pen, potentially we've got Macron or Fillon, two very different politicians.
Yeah.
What about trading the French election?
Yeah, so that's when it gets very, very interesting. It seems that Macron or Fillon are pretty tight in the projections, around 20%, but they could lead to very different policies on the ground. Fillon has said he wants to let go of the new labor laws that Hollande has passed through, the 35-hour work week, a variety of things that would spur a battle with the unions, but may prove beneficial to foreign direct investments, for example, or corporate investments in the country, in industry. On the Macron side, we don't know, given that he would really have to rally up the left-wing vote along with his centrist position, if he would go as far. But it'll be very, very interesting. There may be some instability with the unions, but at the same time, I don't think we're going to have such a sort of labor-conscious approach as Hollande has had.
Looking out quite a little bit further on in the year, how about Germany as well? I mean, we've got elections at the back end of the year in Germany.
Yeah. So Germany seems a little safer, quote unquote, in terms of the ability of the current party and the SDP to really rule out a far right-wing party rise with FDP. There are some critical variables and question marks. I've heard some people talk about a possible CSU, which is the sort of sub-Merkel party in Bavaria, defaulting or not really staying in line as they have in the past. But I think that Merkel is looking very closely at what's happening in the other elections first. I think France will be critical for the results in Germany as well.
And how much of what happens politically in other countries is going to influence Italy, and whether or not we get an election this year in Italy?
My hunch is that in Italy, the considerations on the specific timing of the elections is very much organic to the political situation there, rather than to these other elections. I think there's two key priorities. The first one is the fact that they want to pass new electoral laws to reharmonize the system somehow between the two chambers. We saw that the failed referendum win by Renzi left us with, in Italy, with two different electoral laws. At the same time, I think there's political considerations by specific politicians who want to kind of drag out the tenure of the Gentiloni government, perhaps at least into the fall, or maybe at this point into the original spring deadline that was looming until now.
Just one other thing about all this, and that is we hear a lot of allegations about interference in the news flow and so forth from some countries. Russia's been mentioned. As I say, these are all allegations, unsubstantiated. What are you reading into this? What do you think could potentially be the effects of this? And what does Russia have to gain out of anything like that?
Well, we can see a lot of scenarios in which Russia, especially on the French front, can gain from a certain win or not. There have been allegations that Russian state-owned outlets have been leaking things that could potentially damage Macron more than Fillon. From a Russian perspective, a Le Pen win would be quite beneficial. At the same time, a Fillon win, given that he has had a more amicable stance towards Russia, could also be very, very friendly vis-a-vis the sanctions and the whole architecture around it. I think there's a trend there. Russia is clearly trying to influence some of these discussions to the extent possible. And I think Germany, especially in Merkel, is being very cautious and very observant of what is going on right now.
Okay, well, it's all interesting. Thanks indeed for joining us to take it all apart and put it back together again, because it's a very interesting picture. And we get the first elections coming up mid-March, of course, in the Netherlands, and then it's France and Germany later on in the year, and we'll get to hear news as to whether or not Italy chooses to go for those elections later on. But that was Nicolò Donà della Rosa from Global Risk Insights with his view on the markets and politics.